Hi everyone, this is Yulia Petrachuk and you are listening to the Across Ocean podcast. Today's episode is a special one. Instead of our usual conversation, I'm sharing an interview with conductor Daiana Hoffmann that was originally recorded for the Russian project Monologues on Art, produced by the Svetlana Nesterenko Center for Vocal Art and Cultural Development. I started working with Daiana in 2024 in Russia, and together we introduced several American music premieres to Russian audiences. Since then, our collaboration has grown, and I invited Daiana to lead the second season of my Muffled Voices Opera Festival in the United States. In the interview, Daiana speaks with rare honesty about what conductors and orchestras really live for. That honesty is exactly what Across Oceans is about. So, full credit to the original project for recording the interview.
Hello, my name is Daiana Hoffmann. I am a professional opera and symphony conductor, a distinguished graduate of the Moscow Conservatory and the Belgrade Academy of Music. And I serve as the artistic director and founder of the orchestra, New Moscow, guest conductor of the Lebanese National Symphony Orchestra, an artist with the American company Lyrica Classic, and as of this year, chief conductor of the Muffled Voices Opera Festival in the United States. Today, I would like to talk to you about the complex and mysterious profession of a conductor, about my journey, about how an orchestra lives, what a conductor lives for, and what the orchestra musicians live for. I should probably start by saying that my activities are very diverse because I have my own ensemble. And this is an initiative of mine that is already 10 years old. And the orchestra grew from a student group into such a major product with big concerts, serious venues, with, reviews from critics and so on. It's very interesting that everyone in this orchestra is with me. Many have been with me literally since our days at the conservatory. And this is my domain. Here I can absolutely choose any program. I manage all the processes. And this is, for Russia, a rather unique experience of an independent orchestra that has lived for a decade now, because in our country, most orchestras are state-run ensembles. They have state subsidies, and creating such a, I would say, business project or startup is a rather difficult story. Well, but I am very much an entrepreneur at heart, so this is close to me. It's a completely different activity when you are a guest conductor in some ensemble, like I am a guest conductor at the Philharmonic in Lebanon. It's a very good orchestra, also with a long history with musicians. In the Lebanese orchestra, there are musicians from Armenia, Italy, Japan, and Russia. Such a very multinational and wonderful ensemble. And here I come as a guest conductor, I come for a program, and then I leave. And just recently, during the month of December, we hosted a special program where we recorded a brand new studio album with the ambitious goal of being nominated for a prestigious Grammy Award across several different musical categories. I think it turned out very well. With such a very good soloist, we recorded 3 guitar concertos. And a completely separate activity of mine in America is the artistic direction of an opera festival. And it is a wonderful festival dedicated to women composers. So there is a certain, I would say, unique niche within this project. These are operas by women composers. And mostly, as we all understand together, that women composers only got the chance to compose literally yesterday. It's mostly contemporary opera. And just recently, in November, the first performance of the Muffled Voices Festival took place. It took place at the Maryland Theater, not far from Washington. With a fully American cast, a Russian production team, and a very complex 3-hour contemporary opera by an Israeli composer. There are many different various types of paths to becoming a conductor, as one might say, in this field, right? If before it was thought that conducting is a profession for the elderly, that is like a profession where you should already have a significant amount of gray hair, right? And as a rule, it was an education, a second education, meaning a musician studied to be someone, mastered some instrument, a profession in music, and then had the right to go into conducting. Well, relatively speaking, had the right. Today, this profession is becoming much younger, I would say, which is probably right. Now, as for me, there are many conductors who came to the profession from different instruments. I've been conducting since I was 16. That is, if you look at it, I've probably been conducting longer in my life than not conducting. For conducting, that's a rather unique story because I was probably already conducting even in the final grades of music school and my entire conscious professional path. And a conductor, like all other musicians, studies endlessly, right? We study for 7 years in music school, then 4 years of college, then 5 years of conservatory, then some postgraduate work. And only then, after 30, do you actually start to understand something about this profession, right? And so my entire conscious path wasn't coming to conducting from some instrument. It was just conducting since I was 16. I was recently discussing this with my professor in St. Petersburg. I studied at the Rimsky-Korsakov College under Boris Abalyan. I said to them, can you imagine I've been conducting longer than I haven't? It's honestly quite scary. And of course, that is exactly why conducting feels so incredibly natural to me that it is just plain scary. Very often in my interviews, I am asked a specific question. The very first question I'm always asked in any interview is about the role of female conductors and how I personally feel about being a female conductor in the world today. I always answer that I don't know because I've never been a male conductor. I don't even suspect what they feel. But for me, it's already in my blood that sometimes I have this professional defect. I come to a concert and it's strange for me to see a male conductor on stage because in my head, well, the conductor is me. It's so very strange to me. My ensemble is unique. Probably we have, like when you create a specific product that is created entirely outside the mainstream. Yes, the conventional mainstream in Russia consists of large state ensembles and state orchestras that live on huge state subsidies and operate on massive budgets. Well, some of them are proper ones, yes, and quite adequate ones, but they are very different from us. And when you establish a musical ensemble, you have to, just as you would with any other product, address the fundamental question of why you're doing it. That is, why does Russia actually need yet another orchestra? Very often this niching happens within a certain repertoire. That is, for example, an orchestra was created to play contemporary music. Or perhaps an orchestra was established to play Baroque music. And then somehow it starts from this narrow niche. It's widely considered a startup law, that the narrower your niche is, the much better for you. And I never really had a clear and definitive answer in my orchestra, which is called the New Moscow Orchestra, as to exactly what our repertoire is supposed to be, you see. Our niching probably has always been within the mission of my own. It's, as I formulated for myself, to bring musicians onto the stage, literally or somehow in a figurative and direct sense. The thing is, there are very different types of conductors. There are conductors who are let's say, at a certain distance. And there are those who are closer to the people. Yes, despite the fact that the conducting system is a system of absolute vertical power, where there is no room for maneuver for you to somehow create a team, like, for example, in companies, when there is, for example, a leader, and then he has a team, it descends from him like a ladder. In the conducting profession, I didn't invent this. It's all very simple. There is one conductor, and there is the rest of the orchestra. That's how it's set up. And I've always felt like a friend. Like, my role as a conductor is always like a friend or a mother, I don't know how to say it. Once my esteemed professor Stanislav Dyachenko at the Moscow Conservatory told me this specific phrase. I actually find myself recalling exactly what he told me quite often. Somehow, it all works out very well in practice. He told me that there was this great conductor, Kondrashin, that his orchestra members called him father. And he said, you must reach a point where the orchestra members call you mother, meaning you are responsible for everything. Like, for example, when someone eats, when they get paid, what music we play, who sits where, and everyone comes to you for answers. I think maybe I'm just a very empathetic person. Maybe I took it all to heart, or maybe it's just natural for me, but I've always been and still am more of a true friend to the orchestra. And I've always been, as they say, much closer to the musicians. I've had so many different situations, especially at the very beginning of our orchestra's journey, when producers would come and say, for example, we have a project, they'd hire us, pay us, and they'd tell me, well, they'll just sit there. For instance, we'd agree to play for 3 hours, then lunch, and then play for another 3 hours. They'd say, listen, something's not working out here, so they'll just sit. I'd say, no, they won't just sit. So I have this absolute conviction and belief. I've always protected the musicians and always witnessed a profound sense of injustice in how much an orchestra musician actually does. Compared to what they get paid, and it is important to note that it doesn't matter whether they are in Russia or America, because I know very well now what musicians get paid in America too. They earn more, but they also spend much more in America, so their labor is simply disproportionate to what they receive. But while soloists, like singers, pianists, instrumental soloists, and the conductor is just constantly and endlessly basking in the bright glow of the limelight. Yes, everyone's constantly calling you maestro and so on. They get some kind of exchange. So, okay, we certainly don't make millions of dollars, but at the very least we get what truly feels like a completely fair and honest exchange. An orchestral musician, particularly within an opera, is simply a professional working in the shadows, performing a truly massive job that only they and I usually ever know about. And not every conductor appreciates that either. And their work is just so overlooked, both in terms of pay and how they're treated, their role, and it doesn't matter, even in the tati. I mean, yes, there are soloists in an orchestra, and then there's the group, for example. And the group is called the tutti. It's so unfair because in opera, for instance, the opera lasts 3 long hours or even 4 hours. After the opera finally ends, what exactly happens next? People start applauding hysterically. The soloists, conductor, and director come out. They get the love. But the people who played for 4 hours without stopping, the only ones, because no singer in any opera sings, 4 hours without stopping. They sat there in their pit. They don't even come out for a bow. And it's just such a, I don't know, a monstrous injustice in the way things are set up that it kind of burned inside me because my friends have always been orchestral musicians. I always know what they feel. I know their lives. And my very first big project was exactly that. We put on a major performance after I won a significant grant from Monologues, and we created a unique show for the orchestra. Meaning the musicians actually came out on stage and played specific roles just like professional actors. And for me, it was like finally closing a personal gestalt. Because I truly believe that the way this entire industry treats orchestral musicians specifically is just a massive and profound injustice. Because the amount each person, even in the tutti, puts in just to make an opera accompaniment sound truly professional, those efforts are simply disproportionate to the years of study and all the sacrifices they make compared to what they get in the end. Anyway, let's not dwell on these sad details. Those who have played in the New Moscow Orchestra from the very beginning are people who grew up alongside me. We were students. Then, after the conservatory, we all decided we shouldn't part ways, and I started pushing the project forward. And then we all grew up and became professional musicians. Some play in several orchestras, meaning they play in mine and in a state orchestra, just as I conduct the New Moscow Orchestra, and also conduct, say, in the Middle East and in America. Right? So we all have our own paths, and we grew up and matured together over the years. And lately I've been hearing from my friends very often. And it honestly upsets me quite a bit on one hand. But on the other hand, I understand their perspective perfectly well. Well, it really seems that there is this widespread sense of general disillusionment, and many people are now steadily starting to leave major symphony orchestras and other professional ensembles to pursue different career paths. And it turns out that when someone finally finishes their years at the conservatory and joins a professional ensemble after winning a competitive audition, right? I mean, just to get to that level, for example, let's take the violin. To play the violin with that kind of skill requires a massive amount of daily practice and dedication. to play at a high enough level to be accepted into a good Russian orchestra or perhaps an American or European one. You have to be practicing the violin since you were 5 years old, without any breaks at all, since the age of 5. It is not like conducting, where I started at 16, and that is considered a very early age to begin, whereas you could actually start at 30 or even 35. Well, the result will always be different, but nevertheless, it's possible, right? The violin is like ballet. If you didn't start at 5, well, maybe start at 7. But if you didn't start by 7, it's already too late. And so a person spends their time playing. It's absolutely like an athletic profession for you. It's a sport. You have to keep yourself in shape. And so they play for years. And to get into a good orchestra, you have to graduate from a good university, be in top shape, win a competition, and then finally you've joined this orchestra. It would seem your dream has finally come true, right? And on one hand, I know a huge number of people who really love this job. Just as I truly love my job, we must realize that in the end, for all professional musicians, the actual profession of being a professional musician is really a very recent phenomenon. It is important to note that these formal conservatories we see today are relatively new. These specialized conservatories first appeared in Russia back in the 1860s, which changed everything. That's super recent, right? It's a completely brand new story. I always say that professional musicians are just people who love music more than everyone else. So they spend their whole lives on it and then sit in an orchestra because everyone has a dream. Someone wants to play Mahler's 7th Symphony. Someone dreams of playing a Tchaikovsky symphony, just as I dream of conducting certain pieces and hope that I still have my whole life ahead of me to conduct everything I want. So, on the other hand, a person faces huge disappointment. And since we're talking about what's painful today, it is incredibly painful. I don't know why it hurts me. I'm not an orchestral player at all. But for some reason, it truly and deeply bothers me. There are 2 disappointments. The first disappointment is the level of the salary. Because you work your whole life, and in the end, well, sorry for talking about such mundane things, but in a good Russian orchestra, a person earns so very little. 80% of their monthly salary goes, unless they're a lead concertmaster in certain top orchestras, the average salary, it goes entirely toward paying for a rented apartment in Moscow. So they can't even live on a bare minimum, meaning they're forced to find other ways to take on side gigs because of this, and they're not even allowed to go to them. In short, it's just some kind of... Well, and I have many acquaintances who are thinking about leaving the profession. Just imagine spending 25 years of your life playing a musical instrument, only to suddenly face the cold, harsh reality of your situation. And it all happens simply because of financial circumstances that are entirely out of your hands, right? And when I look at this, I realize that this person, if they had different conditions, they wouldn't even think about it. They say, what should I do? How do I, meaning whether to hustle or not, and so on. And the second nuance, maybe it all sounds so scary now, like I'm demonizing it, but again, I'm talking about what concerns me. It's the role of each musician. And here it's much more complicated, because if money is something you can earn, in the end, well, if you're not happy with something, well, you always have the option to leave the profession and start a business, right? But if you find that you are truly happy with everything and you want to make a contribution, to really invest yourself in the orchestra, it can be quite a challenge, especially if it is a large group. It is often very hard for many individual musicians to fully express their unique artistic voices. I have, for example, several friends who have experienced this. And so with them, we absolutely, communicate musician to musician. It doesn't matter if it's a cellist or a violinist. We talk to them, and they are what you'd call creative individuals. They have many hobbies. They have their own philosophy. They have their own artistic perspectives and their own vision and so on. But the system assumes that they finish the conservatory, join an orchestra, and they're just part of the instrument. No way for them to really open up, to actively participate in some creative musical concepts. But they simply don't have the capacity, especially when playing in a large professional orchestra. So when we have our rehearsals, for example, with the new Moscow Orchestra, I always try to actively involve all the musicians in the creative process, because we usually perform together in a large group of about 20 people. And during our rehearsals, I always try my best not to follow this traditional classical system, where I'm like God the Father or God the Mother. I don't know how to say it right. That I'm the boss, I'm the one speaking, and everyone else just does it. And probably if it's a very large group, it's impossible to discuss with everyone, but in a chamber group, and that is exactly why so many professional musicians also truly love performing in chamber orchestras, especially nowadays. Because you have more opportunities to express yourself. And at rehearsals, I listen to the opinions of these people. Very often their ideas are even better than mine. I mean, you'd think, right, well, they'll say something, and well, I don't know, I think there's a certain strength in that too, that I'm not at all worried that if someone starts saying something at the rehearsal, my role will somehow vanish. That is absolutely not the case. Right. And that is also a very big problem. I have a close friend who is a professional cellist, a very creative and incredibly deep person, who decided to quit a very good orchestra, a prestigious Moscow theater, simply because he said, I'm a musician, not a cog in a machine, and it's nobody's fault. And it doesn't mean there were some terrible rehearsals or something was wrong with that theater or orchestra. It's the system. That's how it's constructed. And for an orchestra to function really well, the musicians have to show up at a certain time and do what the conductor says for a certain number of hours. That's how it works. It doesn't work any other way. But today, the needs of these musicians are already different. Because there's, the internet, there are tons of opportunities. If before, as it seems to me, these are all my wild fantasies, right? If before, as it seems to me, for example, during the Soviet Union, it was the same with the professional music world, as it was with all other career professions. You had a very clear and certain vision that you could trust. And you felt certain in your heart that if you choose a profession, say at 16 or 18 years old, that you'd continue to work steadily as that engineer for the rest of your life. Well, at most you'd change jobs, but not as much would happen in your life as happens today. That you can simultaneously, do business, be a musician, do this, do that. And you can even have 10 social media accounts where you're a different person. I mean, there are tons of opportunities. And so before, it seems to me, when an orchestral musician followed this path, finishing the conservatory and joining an orchestra, traveling the world, there's a lot that's wonderful in this profession. We encountered the very best that humanity has given to the world. Yes, that's classical music. We're in it every day. We travel because an orchestra is all about touring, right? And for many, I think it wasn't just that it was enough, but there wasn't even a thought that there could be something else. But for today's, young people, whom I still count myself among, and those who are younger, they see a completely different picture. They see that there are far more opportunities in the world than people saw 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50, even 10 years ago. And they're already starting to have questions. Is this all there is? Because after 7 years of working in an orchestra, you realize that this world is absolutely clear to you, as they say in that meme, right? That's it. I mean, you've played everything you wanted. You've mastered this craft, and that's very important. I mean, it's very important to work in a professional orchestra, and basically nothing else is going to happen to you. The only thing you can do is an incredible somersault, like putting down the violin and becoming a conductor. That is basically what people do, sometimes out of despair, because what else is there left to do? You have no room to maneuver. So you've played for 7 years, you've realized that overall, nothing new. You know how the section works, you know the bowings in all the most famous works, you know these works by heart. Conductors change, but as a rule, if you work in one ensemble, you get 5 conductors, roughly speaking the same ones. And you've already seen the world. So where do you grow from here? What do you do next? There's nothing left to do. If you don't want to become a conductor, roughly speaking, yes, then there's nowhere else to grow. And that's the problem. And young musicians are starting to ask these questions. Because, excuse me, they already see that the world is huge, that there are many opportunities, that they can develop so much in themselves, and that, as I say with my friend, the concertmaster, I'm not just a bassoon, I'm not just a violin. Yes, we have this kind of cult in the world of academic instrumentalism where, I'm Lesha, the bassoonist. But you're not just a bassoonist, the bassoon is your instrument. Yes, we spend our whole lives learning this, but you're much more than just a bassoonist. That's what I think. And many are starting to think that way. And this is some kind of crisis. I look at it, like some kind of, financial pyramid scheme that's going to burst at some point. That will simply end up exploding somehow. Because these various demands are appearing and increasing more and more and more. Modern technologies provide more and more and more opportunities, and people want more. And the modern system of orchestral life, it doesn't provide an answer to these questions. And I don't have an answer to that question, and I'm not criticizing her in any way. As I said, to play a symphony well, people have to come for a certain number of hours and listen to the conductor. Personally, whenever I go there, say to Lebanon, and they start not listening to me over there, I start being very angry and quite strict. Well, because there's really no other way to do it. That is just how it works. So some radical changes to the system are needed, and that's a very slow process. Everything I'm talking about now is, let's say, not some kind of catastrophe or demonization, right? I'm a big fan of the orchestra, of orchestral life. It's more my personal creative vision, my own unique character, what I perceive to be such an incredibly very long process. So it's what I see as individual people and what will change, which might take, decades, right? Nevertheless, the orchestra exists. It's thriving. And thank God, because we all deal, mostly, despite the fact that there's a huge layer of modern music, but still the golden repertoire of classical music. And our task is first and foremost the preservation of heritage. Yes, the most famous repertoire of classical music is still the repertoire of the 18th, 19th, 20th century. And here you specifically need large groups of musicians so that many individuals can come together to play this music. Yes, so that people would come to the orchestra, sit down and play. And in general, of course, I don't want to say some high-flown things about how, without classical music, we'll all die. Recently, I spoke at a business accelerator, and they were literally demanding that I explain how is it, why, show us in numbers, why without classical music, children or adults or people. And I say, what kind of numbers do you want from me? What can I show you right now, right? But actually, I think that the moment of orchestral playing, especially orchestral, why am I talking specifically about the orchestra? In my own subjective opinion, I truly believe that every composer has a certain unique creative heritage. And within this rich heritage, there are, let's say, his very, very highest and most significant creative peaks that define his work. Of course, we can say that this romance is just a gem, but still the most complex, the most interesting structures are precisely the symphonic repertoire. It's precisely non-program music, in my view, not even operas, but music, like when you turn on, a recording, and it goes for 40 minutes without a break, without any words, without explanations. That's like the peak. As a rule, for every composer in their work, their symphonic cycles are the peak. And this is in principle the best thing if we're talking about the human species, right? Human being. Then it's some kind of... There's so much terrible stuff, right? Associated with humans that we see today, right? And saw yesterday, and we'll see tomorrow. And there's something that's the best thing that a human being can possibly produce as a living creature. And so symphonic cycles or classical music, that's it. So when people come to the hall, when we do this, that's why I'm such a fan. I tell everyone, guys, my friends who aren't musicians, listen to classical music, even if you don't understand anything. Let me explain it simply. So I tell all my friends, I have friends, some entrepreneurs, people not from the music world at all. I give them all for their birthdays tickets to the Philharmonic. Then I record some podcasts, listen to this, listen to that, because I understand that it's it's a pleasure. It's something your soul will never encounter in any other way again. I have this unique opportunity that I somehow got into this and even reached the symphonic repertoire, which is basically, the pinnacle. And it's just such an incredible privilege, and I just want everyone to have it. Because even though we can say that opera and so on, that it's such a palace-based art form originally, but there are no more palaces. And so I want classical music in every home, so to speak. Right. And of course, it's different in different countries. In the Middle East, there's its own rich tradition, a very completely unique history. In Russia, its own history. In America, we just did an opera festival. It's totally different there because it's not their heritage at all. Opera is just not their heritage. People in the audience at the opera sit there like it's a musical or a bit like stand-up. I was absolutely horrified. But still, every person deep down within their hearts, they should have the fundamental right to experience this. Let's put it that way. And we are the ones who should give people that right and work to make it happen. Not only to play better, but to ensure that this distance, the huge gap between us and the average viewer who knows nothing about symphonic cycles, becomes smaller. So you have to hit it harder, roughly speaking, right? For your ball to fly a bit further, you have to hit it harder. So there must be such an impulse from the conductor that it reaches them first, they feel it, then they give back, and it reaches even further. It's such a complex structure. And it's really interesting how the audiences, if we're talking about the Middle East, America, Russia, which I know very well, how different the audiences are everywhere. In the Middle East, the audience is very appreciative. It's their tradition to give compliments. Every time there's a concert in the Middle East, I feel like I'm just brilliant. I don't know, it really couldn't be any better. I'm joking, of course, because people here express their emotions so much. It's not like at our Tchaikovsky concert hall where they see something wonderful and everyone there is just like, okay. Well, we can debate the various reasons why that is, but people are incredibly passionate about their beliefs and they really express their emotions. They're deeply and sincerely grateful, and they show their feelings without feeling any sense of shyness or thinking about how intellectual they might look while expressing them. In America, the audience typically comes to unwind and relax. They basically come and expect bread and circuses for the most part. And that's both great and not so great, because with complex art forms like opera, it's difficult, of course, because their tradition is the musical and opera isn't their tradition. They feel very relaxed in the audience. At the Kennedy Center's Washington Opera, someone just comes out and starts a warm-up routine, like stand-up, basically. For me, having attended the Mariinsky Theater since I was 8, it was quite shocking. Russian audiences are different, and there's a stereotype that, only grandmothers and so on go to classical music concerts. I don't agree with that, because for Russia, it's, completely unfair, because we have a very intelligent audience, very discerning in a good way. And in Russia, there's this great equal exchange with the audience, meaning they expect a lot from you, but you also expect a lot from them. I mean, we go out with the new Moscow Orchestra with programs that, aren't the waltz of the flowers at all. And we expect the audience to, understand it all. Now you have to take it all in. And the audience expects, come on, I've already heard this and this and this. So how will you play it? And who even are you? And that's great. It's and here I see that I wouldn't necessarily say that the audience in Russia is changing all that much. I mean, I'm not 80 years old, but I have always personally found the Russian audience to be exceptionally intelligent, very discerning, and incredibly attentive, including the younger generation. In my own audience, I actually think there are a significantly larger number of younger individuals than older people. So there it is. I truly believe in this incredibly bright future of interacting with the Russian audience. But it is also very interesting to see exactly how it happens all over the world, of course.